Jeg er klar.
Test, test, test. Okay, we're ready for this year's BornHack's first keynote. It's Peter Stuge, who's coming from Berlin, who's going to talk about hardware, politics, and hacking. Let's give a round of applause for Peter.
Thank you very much for coming. So I want to try to say two things today. So I want to talk about the x86 hardware industry a little bit, because it's interesting. So look at the business, look at some of the interactions between the different companies involved. And I also want to talk about hacking. And I want to talk about how important I think hacking is in our society. And if I have a chance, I'll also point out that hacking is supernatural. It's nature does it all the time. So let's go into x86 right away. Why bother with x86? I think x86 is probably the most widespread architecture that we have for technology, for computing. And we have a situation where there is nearly a monopoly. So there's one huge vendor, and there's a second smaller vendor. Like, I don't know if you can really say that the two are actually competing still. At some point they were. I'm not so sure anymore. So it's a near monopoly situation, I think. And from what I can tell, looking at this industry and looking at the vendors, it looks like development of new products and new features and new technology is not really so much based on ideas and innovation with the vendors, but rather it seems that somebody else outside of the vendors are driving the development or pushing for features or so on. And one way this is noticeable is that we as consumers or end customers, there's not that much advertisement for new x86 features and new x86 innovations to us, right? But of course there is advertising for x86 features, and it's interesting to try to find those, because they are targeted, of course, at the actual customers for the x86 vendors. So this book is a really good read. Sometimes it's abbreviated PSTR. I'd like to call it PEST for this talk because that's more fun. The full title is Platform Embedded Security Technology Revealed. So this is so the subtitle, Safeguarding the Future of Computing with Intel Embedded Security and Management Engine. So this is published by Intel. It's freely available as a download online. You don't have to pay anything. You can get a PDF or an ebook, put in an email address, and all is good. And this is a collection of white papers about the Intel Management Engine primarily, and some other little bits of Intel platforms as well. But it was very interesting for me to read this book. It came out 3 years ago or so, maybe, because this is clearly marketing directed at the actual customers of these platforms. So not me as an end user, but reading this, we can learn either what Intel thinks that they can sell products, like how they can sell their chips, or we can learn who Intel thinks their customer is, or actually who actually is the customer, right? Because we can see, okay, what does Intel emphasize? What is important for Intel to showcase, to demonstrate? And from that, we can sort of figure out, okay, who does that fit to? What companies might that be? So it's a very interesting read. It's not very dense, it's a few hundred pages, but it's a quick read because it's white papers collected. Fun fact: there's a JVM in every CPU or every platform, and you can load modules into it. One of many interesting things I found there. So there are some quotes in there that I found particularly interesting and that I like quite a bit. So in chapter 7, that's about trust computing and how we trust computers, or how computers can be trusted, and how computers have a lot more information than perhaps our best friends even. So at the top, there's this quote from William Shakespeare. I like it a lot. Love all, trust a few, do wrong to none. And then the text begins, and a little bit further down on the same page, there's this quote. So the owner of a platform is not always the one to protect. For example, one of the biggest concerns of any content provider is its for-profit contents being transmitted to a rogue device that has been hacked by the owner. So wait, what? So Intel is telling me that, or us, the owner of a platform is not always the one to protect. Okay? So obviously somebody else has to be protected instead then, right? A rogue device that has been hacked by the owner. So if the owner hacks their device, now this device is rogue. Okay, so clearly somebody else is the customer. If I'm the owner, I'm obviously not the customer anymore. So what does this industry look like? We have the platform vendors. They do CPU and chipset development, like the large components in x86 systems. Basically, there are the two, Intel and AMD. There are several more smaller ones for industrial applications, for example, but Intel and AMD are the main ones that we know and that we have easy access to as consumers. Then there is the IBV, the independent BIOS vendor. And so if you have a PC, you need some kind of BIOS or a UEFI to boot. And Intel and AMD, they don't develop those themselves, and also the many companies that we buy machines from, they don't develop them themselves completely. So there's this group of companies, the IBVs. There are only really two large ones, Phoenix and AMI, and Inside is a smaller one, still in the market a bit, that fill this role. So the BIOS vendors, they get from the platform vendors, they get information about, okay, we're about to start selling this next platform, the next new platform that's coming out. And the IBVs, they get the documentation they need, and they get some simulation models and whatever, and maybe, so a little bit later in the cycle, they actually get some reference boards, so they get some actual hardware to test on. And the IBVs, they develop a BIOS for this reference board, and then there is a demo product for this platform that the platform vendors can show around and see and say, hey, look, it boots, and you can run DOS and whatever you want to do. So another company in this whole ecosystem is the ODM, the original design manufacturer. Less known, much less known. Maybe you've heard of one or two of them. I hadn't for a very long time until I started looking into x86 a bit more in depth. There are like somewhere between 5 and 10 throughout the world. Most of them in Asia. All of them I know of are in Taiwan. And what they do is they take the, they also get the same, much of the same information from the platform vendor. They get an advance notice. We're about to release these new platforms. Here's, and the platform vendor says, here's our reference design for this platform. So here's an example of how you can design a system that includes our next CPU and our next chipset. The ODMs, they then, they're essentially consultants, and they work for the OEMs. So the OEMs are the brands that we know, the companies that we recognize, that we buy products from, maybe. And as the OEMs want to bring out the next generation, let's say laptop, they will contact the ODM and they will say, hello, ODM, can you please design me a system that meets these specifications? So it needs to use this next generation platform from the platform vendor, and I would ideally like if you can ship me some kind of BIOS, because otherwise I can't sell this system to my customers. And then the ODM does a design and manufactures the design and packs it into a case that maybe was specified by the OEM, or maybe just the color was, or maybe just the logo on some sticker. And then there's the system owner. That's us, right? The end users who have to pay for it all. So what's missing from this slide? Anybody know? I mean, yeah? Hollywood. Yes, software, exactly. So what are the products that we're actually buying? We're buying Windows machines, or we're buying Mac OS machines. This was up until 2011. So the Windows machines, the criteria for a Windows machine is that it has this Windows logo certification. It has the Windows logo sticker. And if you are an OEM and you're trying to sell some kind of product, you say it's a PC, but it doesn't have this Windows sticker, you're not going to sell many of them, right? And Apple, they're doing their own thing. They do Mac OS machines up until 2011. So then something happened. There's a new player has entered this industry. It's essentially more of the same, even though they're taking a different approach. But the principle is really the same. It's the Chrome ecosystem, Chrome machines. What's the defining characteristic? They have a Chrome logo and they boot to a browser, and yeah, that's it, right? You know what you're gonna get, and either you want to run Windows, or you want to run Mac OS, or you want to run web apps. It's sort of what the machines. What the machines offer that are available to us. So we have a situation where we're more and more reliant on computing machines. We know that machines don't protect the owner always. So that means that we consumers, we become somehow content slaves, content and service slaves, I call it here. Like, we're producing content, we're consuming content, we're using services, but that's all about Hollywood and service providers, right? That's not so much about our computing devices, or about us even. So the machines, what do they protect? I guess they protect machine sales, right? The number one rule for Intel and all of the other vendors is to make a profit. So they want to keep selling more machines. That means protect service providers. And so computing machines, they've become just this vessel, or this conduit for content and services, and they're decreasingly being used to do actual computing. General purpose computing machines are long gone. And I think that as a society, we have a big problem here, right? We're moving all the computing that we're doing away from us to somewhere else. Right? And I have little hope that politics will solve this problem for us. But I mean, maybe they don't even understand the problem. The normal strategy for politics and politicians to just push problems onto industry, I think, will not really work here. And yeah, because industry is the problem, right? In this particular view, so we have to do it ourselves, right? And then we come to hacking. It is so important So very, very important to keep hacking, because the gaps are growing in society, right? We can see it everywhere: resources, politics, knowledge. Centralization is the trend, and when we look at technology, if we have centralized technology, it's quite sensitive. There's a single point of failure, right? We all know that's a bad strategy. And if you have a very large centralized service or system and it breaks, you have a very large problem, because a lot of people are affected and a lot of processes are affected. So as an example, the CPUs that we have, the CPU bugs, looking at the platform vendors, Spectre meltdown, this latest one, L1TF, the other week. I think this is just the beginning, because these CPUs are so complex. The problems will continue, and I think Intel has built themselves into, or painted themselves into a bit of a corner. But let's see, maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, large service providers, they are really vulnerable targets, right? If somebody wants to disrupt or attack society, then that's a very easy, or like a high value target that we don't want to be attacked. We want the services that we use in society to be reliable. We want them to be usable. We want them to be as much available as possible. So I think we have to push for new solutions and new directions. So what is hacking then? When I was thinking about this question, I looked to the hacker ethic, and like I tried to find the early descriptions of hacker culture. This author Stephen Levi in 1984 wrote this book, Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution, about MIT hackers. So the people who were experimenting, tinkering with computers there in the very early computer days. And it comes down to 5 points that I think we are lacking far too much in society: sharing, openness, decentralization, free access to computers, and well, world improvement, right? That's the ultimate goal for the hacker, to help society become stronger and more pleasant, a better place to live for everyone, right? So looking into these hacker ethics a little bit more, this author, he emphasized not only the concept itself of the hacker ethic, but also popularizing it. So getting it widespread, making it known. What drives hackers? What drives us as hackers? What we do and why is it so important to us? And how do we think about these things? So the access to computers, of course. Information should be free and promote decentralization. I think this is like access to computers that seems to be happening. Information is also increasingly becoming free, but this decentralization, there we're not doing so well. I wish we could do better there. Then there's this whole asteriskist, like judging people by silly criteria. I'm glad to see that this is a topic for some time, and that we're doing a lot. We're doing really good things, I think. There are problems, of course there are problems, but I think the hacker community is much better than many other places, many other communities. And another fun thing is You can create art and beauty on a computer, they said. And what does that mean? So when I looked into that a little bit more, it's not so much about graphics or music, like the classical arts, but they were also talking about the beauty of the code that you've created on the computer. This connects, for me personally, to the decentralization. I think the decentralized approach is inherently artistic, right? Something's going on everywhere, and it's not just in this one critical point. So the last slide I have is this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. in 1967, and it seems pretty fitting to me. We're now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We're confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. There is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action. And I think that is exactly what hacking is. And if you see hacking which isn't this, then try to make a change, right? Because this is what hacking should be. And as I mentioned, also hacking being natural. As I was reading through this hacker ethic background, I stumbled upon Darwin's study of orchids, where he wrote the evolution, the theory of the evolution, right? And he also wrote a book. He wrote many books. Wrote one book about orchids and how orchids have this improbable, quite clearly not engineered way of getting bees to transfer the nectar to other flowers. So the orchids, it's a very mechanically, let's say, complicated and unexpected structure, where the bees are sort of led the right way into the flower, and nobody would have built a flower that way. Nobody would have engineered a flower that way, but the flower became that way somehow. So it seems that nature is using the parts at hand, parts that were found in other places of this flower, and created a solution for a problem that wasn't perhaps super well engineered or super elegant, but it works, and it's using parts at hand, and I think that's amazing. So let's see if we can make more of those. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Peter?
You mentioned these recent Spectre-like attacks in L1MF as being a result of centralization in x86 manufacturing. How exactly is that?
So it's more that it's more an example of a very complex system that has where when it fails, it has extremely large ramifications or effects, right? I could say that it's centralized because it's all made by one vendor, right? But it's more about we've put so much into one system, the CPU, that it is so complicated that it fails left and right. And I think so it's started, right? And I think we'll see more of it because they are so complicated, the CPUs. And it seems to me that it would be better engineering to have a more distributed, more decentralized, maybe even better hacking, to have a more distributed and decentralized computing solution, right? Than to have a single CPU doing, trying to do everything and in the end actually failing at doing anything. Does that answer the question? Okay, yeah, sure.
Other questions? No. Let's give a big round of applause for Peter.
Thank you.